Okay. Hey, I like how I slipped into that last video and said that was going to be the last installment. Well, there you go. Hey, let's take a look at how genes are expressed differently based on what cells they happen to be in. And this goes outside of the bounds of the central dogma of biology, so away from the biochemical processes and now more into morphological development. So, how does a cell in an anterior portion of an organism know to become brain and nose and eyes? Let's take a closer look. First of all, a very brief review of basic embryology. Fertilization produces a zygote that's going to divide exponentially. Okay? The ball of cells that's produced is referred to as a morula. I've always remembered this because exponential growth will produce more cells. It's a morula. Okay? That will begin to hollow out inside, and cells will begin to migrate to specific portions or poles. It's hollowed out inside. I remember this one, the blastula, because it seems as if there's something that's happened to blast the cells out of the inside. There's been an explosion and it has blasted those cells out, hollowing out this ball of cells that was once a morula. Gastrulation is a process that produces the entire alimentary canal from mouth to anus. That has to be produced. It's going to dimple in from one end to the other, forming the entire gastric system. So that is a gastrula. It's going to at least have a dimple in at one end and eventually produce the entire alimentary canal, eventually producing an embryo. So, where cells are in that embryo will help to determine what kinds of cells they're going to become. So, cells that are closer to wings versus cells that are closer to legs are going to begin to produce different proteins. So, here we have tissue that begins to make chemical choices based on proximity to the body. So, here we have a could be a frog salamander, okay, proximal or closer to the body wall here. We have different regions. Distally, we're going to have different tissues that will produce digits versus producing humerus. So those cells will begin to behave differently and produce different proteins based on where they're at morphologically in that developing embryo. A closer look. And so what we end up with is what are referred to as cytoplasmic determinants. A lot of these substances are in the egg as it's fertilized, uh, heavily dependent on the mother's RNA, the mother's cytoplasm, and will begin to move based on the embryological divisions from there. So here we have cytoplasmic determinants in the mother's egg cell. Those will begin to move to different poles of that zygote. And even at the very early two cell stage, we already have different determinants in different cells, immediately starting to develop an anterior posterior kind of a concept, or at least side one, side two, whatever the critter happens to be here. So those cytoplasmic determinants will also have an effect on how cells communicate. So here we have that first set of cytoplasmic determinant divisions causing for multiple layers in between in an embryo, depending on what signals are being sent from tissue to tissue. Signals? Yes. From one cell to another, even early on in this embryological, here you got 32 cell morula here. Okay, what kinds of signals are being sent from cell one